when a storm closes every road and the radio begins answering with voices that should not be there, the wilderness stops feeling empty. Hello everyone, and welcome back to channel. Tonight we follow park rangers through an unmarked Appalachian forest, a flooding desert canyon, a blackwater swamp, an Alaskan coastline, and a cave where the map refuses to close. Some will face old folklore. One will face a living man. All will carry something home. These stories come from real witnesses, though names and identifying details have been changed. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell before we begin. Story 1. Clara Wynne kept 3 flat creek stones on the corner of her desk. They were gray, smooth, and nearly identical. She used them to hold down maps whenever the old heater came on and pushed warm air across the Chua Ranger District office. That Wednesday morning, the stones sat on the Slick Rock map while Clara traced a route with one finger. Rain ticked against the metal window frame. It had started before dawn, soft enough that the gutters still sounded empty. The trail crew had entered from Big Fat Gap the previous afternoon. Nate Holloway and Lila Kent were certified crosscut sawyers. Their third member, Owen Price, carried wedges, an axe, a Pulaski, and the first aid kit. They were clearing storm-thrown timber along the lower end of Big Fat Trail, then working toward its junction with Slick Rock Creek Trail. There were no painted blazes inside the wilderness. Signs stood only at junctions, and several old logging traces crossed the maintained routes. After enough rain, each path looked equally deliberate. Clara had given the crew the usual tailgate briefing beside their government truck. Check the binds before cutting. Keep both escape routes open. Call before changing the work plan. Make camp above the creek. Nate had lifted the sheathed crosscut saw onto his shoulder. And no singing after dark, he said. Clara told him the saw made enough noise for everyone. Their first evening check-in came at 5:15. They had cleared 2 chestnut oaks and were camping near Nichols Cove. Their signal was weak but readable. The morning call never came. At first, nobody treated that as an emergency. The ridges broke radio coverage into narrow pockets. A handheld could work on one side of a tree and fail on the other. By noon, the rain had strengthened, and the district weather alert showed a line of thunderstorms moving in from Tennessee. Clara called the crew on the direct channel, then through the repeater. Trail 6, Chua 2. Only rain hissed through the speaker. She packed a tarp, dry layers, medical kit, spare radio battery, food for 4 people, and a coil of throw line. Before leaving, she slid the map from beneath the 3 stones and folded it into a clear case. Wes Calder, the recreation technician on desk duty, watched her tighten the cover on her pack. "Creek gauge is climbing," he said. "If the ford looks brown, it is already too late." Clara nodded. Everyone in that office had a sentence they repeated until it became part of the building. She reached Big Fat Gap shortly after 2. Rain drummed on the truck roof hard enough to blur the engine idle. She gave dispatch her mileage, wrote her name and entry time in the trail register, and clipped the radio microphone high on her shoulder strap. The trail dropped steeply through wet hardwoods. Fallen leaves moved in shallow sheets under her boots. Water ran down the center of the tread and vanished beneath roots before appearing again farther below. Clara stopped every 15 minutes to call Trail 6. She listened through the full break after each transmission. Nothing answered. Near the first minor junction, she heard stone drag across stone. It came from uphill. There were 3 slow scrapes. Each lasted about a second. A pause separated them, clean and even. Clara tilted her head and waited. Water fell from tulip poplar leaves in heavy drops. A dead limb knocked somewhere above her. The scraping did not repeat. She looked up the slope but saw only dark trunks and rain. Loose rocks shifted all the time in saturated ground. Squirrels moved acorns beneath leaves. A bear could turn over stones looking for insects. Clara adjusted the microphone on her shoulder and continued downhill. At the junction with Nichols Cove Trail, the wooden sign was slick and almost black. Clara checked the map even though she knew the turn. 3 scrapes moved through the trees behind her. This time they sounded closer. She turned before the third one ended. The trail she had descended was empty. Water ran over a pale stone at the edge of the tread, making it tremble against another. Clara pressed her boot between them. The trembling stopped. Her radio clicked. "Chua 2, hold at the junction." The voice belonged to a woman. It was low and steady, with the flattened sound produced by an old microphone. Clara raised the radio. "Station calling Chua 2. Identify." Static spread across the channel. Beneath it, something tapped 3 times. Then the woman returned. "Chua 4. Hold at the junction." Clara knew the current radio plan. Chua 1 was the district ranger. Clara was Chua 2. Wes used Chua 3 when he worked in the field. There was no Chua 4. She called dispatch. Wes answered after 2 attempts. His voice broke around the edges. "Say again on the calling unit." Female voice identifying as Chua 4. The line remained open, but Wes said nothing for several seconds. "Do not answer it again," he said. The rain filled the gap after his transmission. Clara asked whether Chua 4 belonged to another district. Wes told her he was checking. Then the repeater dropped them both. She left the junction and moved faster. Slick Rock Creek announced itself before she reached the valley floor. Its normal sound was broad and continuous. Now individual rocks struck beneath the current, producing hollow knocks that traveled through the ground. The first ford was already above her knees. Clara unbuckled her pack belt, faced upstream, and planted each boot before moving the other. The water shoved against her shins. Brown foam folded around the trunks along the bank. On the far side, she found a fresh cut through a fallen hemlock. The kerf was clean. Pale sawdust had turned to paste in the rain. A wedge remained driven into the upper bind. The crew had been there. 50 yards farther on, their crosscut saw stood halfway through a red oak across the trail. One handle was attached. The other lay in the leaves. A rain jacket had been folded over the sheathed end of the blade to protect it. Clara crouched beside the saw. The crew would never walk away from an open cut without removing the handles and flagging the hazard. She found Owen's hard hat beneath a rhododendron branch. No blood marked it. The suspension straps inside were still dry. Her radio clicked again. They went toward the creek. Clara did not answer. "Chua 2, they went toward the creek." The voice was clearer now. It sounded close enough to come from another person standing under the same trees. Clara switched to the direct tactical channel. "Trail 6, this is Clara. Key twice if you cannot speak." The speaker gave one burst of static, then a second. Clara gripped the radio until the ridges along its casing pressed into her palm. "Give me your location." A man's voice pushed through the rain. "Above the water. We found the old grade." It could have been Nate. The storm cut away the middle of each word. Clara asked for a landmark. 3 scrapes answered from the slope across the creek. She climbed toward the old grade. Mountain laurel caught her pack. The root appeared under the leaves as a shallow shelf, too straight to be natural and too overgrown to be maintained. At the next split, both traces looked used. Water had exposed dark soil on each one. No sign marked the junction. Clara removed her compass. Before the needle settled, the scraping came from the left trace. 3 measured strokes. Her radio followed. "Left, Chua 2. She checked the bearing. The left trace angled away from the crew's planned route and toward a steep drainage. The right trace climbed toward higher ground. "Trail 6, key once for left, twice for right." 2 clicks sounded on the tactical channel. At the same moment, Chua 4 spoke through the repeater. "Left." Clara took the right trace. The shelf narrowed until her uphill shoulder brushed wet rock. The forest below had disappeared behind moving gray rain. She could hear the creek, but it seemed to come from every direction. Another radio call arrived. "Wrong way." Clara kept climbing. "Chua 2, turn around." She pulled the radio from her shoulder and lowered the volume. The display showed no unit identifier. The receive light remained green even after the voice stopped. The 3 scrapes came from behind her, then they came from ahead. The rhythm passed along the slope, one set answering another. Clara's tongue pressed against the back of her teeth. She forced air out through her nose and continued counting her steps. After 100 paces, she found a strip of orange flagging tied low on a mountain laurel stem. Owen always left a long tail and cut the ends at an angle. This piece matched his habit. Farther ahead, metal struck rock. Once, twice, then a third time. Clara called Nate's name. A headlamp blinked through the trees. Another appeared beside it. She heard Lila coughing beneath a sandstone overhang just above the old grade. All 3 crew members were there. Owen had wrapped his sleeping bag around Nate, whose ankle was swollen inside a half-removed boot. Their shelter sat on a narrow patch of ground above the rising creek. Lila caught Clara's sleeve. "We heard you below us," she said, "for an hour." Clara looked at their radios. Both handhelds were powered off. The spare battery had been removed and wrapped in plastic. Nate had slipped while scouting the ford. They had carried him uphill and sheltered when the direct route became impassable. None of them had transmitted since shortly after noon. Each time they tried, a woman answered using their own call sign and told them to move downhill. Clara began splinting Nate's ankle. She gave Lila the satellite messenger and told her to send their coordinates. Owen heated water on a small stove. From below the overhang came 3 slow scrapes. Everyone stopped moving. The sound traveled across the rock beneath their boots. It did not come from the creek. Clara switched on her headlamp and aimed it toward the old grade. At first, rain was all she could see. Then a person stepped between 2 trees. The figure wore a long gray coat or a blanket pulled close around the body. One hand stayed hidden against the chest. The other hung at the side. Water shone on the face with the dull finish of wet stone. No one spoke. The radio clipped to Clara's shoulder turned on by itself. "Bring them left." The figure took 1 step uphill. Rock grated under it. Clara tore the battery from the radio and threw both pieces into the leaves. Owen kicked dirt over the stove flame. Lila hauled Nate upright while Clara took his other side. They moved along the right-hand grade without their packs. Behind them came 3 scrapes. They did not look back. The satellite message reached dispatch. A rescue team entered from a higher trailhead and met them near naked ground before midnight. By then, the storm had passed east, leaving only water dropping from the canopy. Clara returned with a recovery crew 2 days later. They found the packs, the stove, and both pieces of her radio beneath the overhang. The cross-cut saw remained in the red oak. They found no footprints near the place where the figure had stood. Rain had erased every track, including their own. The incident report attributed the voice to repeater interference during severe weather. The 3 trail workers were listed as temporarily disoriented after an injury and rapidly rising water. Clara's radio was sent for inspection. The technician found moisture inside the battery housing and no recoverable transmission history. Wes located an older communications binder in a locked cabinet. Chua 4 appeared on a radio plan from decades earlier. The name beside it had been covered with correction fluid. A later inventory marked the call sign retired and unavailable for reassignment. The final report did not mention the binder. Clara stayed with the Forest Service, but she stopped carrying a radio across unmarked junctions. She would turn it off before reaching the sign, remove the battery, and walk 50 paces beyond the split before putting it back together. The crew recovered. Nate returned the next spring with a brace under his boot. None of them would work slick rock after rain. Clara eventually moved the 3 creek stones from her office to her kitchen table. When thunderstorms cross the mountains at night, she places each stone on a separate windowsill, far enough apart that none of them can touch. Story 2. The first alarm reached Mateo Rivas while he was scraping mud from a pressure transducer with a toothbrush. He was alone in the resource office behind the Pine Springs Visitor Center. Outside, the Guadalupe escarpment had disappeared behind a wall of rain. Water struck the windows sideways. Each gust pushed a thin line of dust beneath the door. The transducer in his hand had spent 6 months inside a stilling pipe at Manzanita Spring. Mateo cleaned the vent holes, checked the cable for rodent damage, and lowered it into a bucket of water. A green status light blinked once. He entered the test depth into a field tablet. The light blinked again. Mateo liked instruments that behaved the same way twice. Desert water rarely did. Most weeks, his job involved long drives between dry monitoring sites. He measured spring discharge, downloaded temperature records, surveyed high water marks, and removed wind-blown grass from solar panels. Visitors sometimes asked why the park employed a hydrologic technician in a place where they had not seen a creek. Mateo would point toward the mountains. "It is all up there waiting." His network included 5 flood gauges along Pine Spring Canyon. The lowest unit stood near the alluvial fan. The highest sat beneath a narrow limestone pour-off. Each station recorded water pressure and transmitted a short data packet through a radio relay. During a normal storm, the upper gauges rose first. The pulse moved down the canyon, gaining sediment and speed. The lower station sounded the final alarm. That night, the order was reversed. The station at the fan reported a sharp rise. 3 minutes later, the next gauge upstream followed. Then the middle gauge triggered. Mateo opened the live hydrograph. The blue line climbed in clean steps from low elevation to high, as if the flood were moving toward the ridge. He checked the timestamps. The units synchronized every morning through their navigation receivers. 1 could drift. 5 could not drift in sequence. The office door opened, and volunteer Dana Crowley stepped inside with rain running from the brim of her hat. She had spent the afternoon helping close the Smith Spring Trail. Dana was a retired county surveyor who volunteered 3 days a week and distrusted every map she had not checked herself. She looked at the hydrograph. "That is backward." Mateo refreshed the screen. "The clocks are wrong, all of them." He did not answer. The uppermost unit, Station Mesa, had not reported. Without that reading, the duty ranger could not determine whether the flood pulse had already passed the backcountry trail crossing or was still building above it. 2 maintenance employees were waiting at a service shelter beyond the crossing. They had radio contact, but the access road would soon be impassable. The district ranger authorized Mateo to inspect the relay station from the high bench above the wash. Dana went because she knew the survey route, and no field employee was available to accompany him. Mateo packed a spare telemetry unit, survey flagging, throw bags, headlamps, and a handheld weather meter. Dana added 2 climbing helmets and a length of static rope. Before they left, Station Mesa appeared on the screen. It reported no water. Its location had changed. The new coordinates placed it several hundred yards upstream from the steel post where Mateo had installed it. He assumed the navigation receiver had acquired a reflected signal from the cliffs. The canyon walls were good at bending radio waves into places they did not belong. Dana read the coordinates twice. "Equipment can give a bad position," she said. "Ground cannot." They drove north from Pine Springs with the emergency lights off. Lightning opened the desert in white pieces. For an instant, every yucca and limestone shelf stood sharp against the rain. Then the windshield held nothing beyond the wipers. At the gated service track, Mateo stopped the truck on high ground. Water already crossed the road in shallow brown ribbons. He called in their position and expected return time. The walk to the bench normally took 20 minutes. That night it took twice as long. Mud packed beneath their boots. Creosote released its bitter smell whenever rain struck the leaves. The wash remained hidden below them, but they could hear stones moving in it. The sound began as a soft ticking, then larger rocks started knocking together. Mateo stopped at the survey marker above the first gauge. The steel post stood below, surrounded by fast water. Its green light blinked at regular intervals. That gauge had reported dry conditions. Mateo checked the live data. The pressure reading showed no measurable depth, though water reached halfway up the post. Dana aimed her light at the current. "Do you trust your eyes or the file?" "Neither yet." Mateo photographed the gauge and entered a manual observation. Before he could transmit it, Station Mesa sent another coordinate update. The point lay ahead of them. It was farther up the bench now, almost the same distance away as before. They continued toward the relay. The canyon rose on their left as a black wall. On their right, the slope fell toward the wash. The ticking below grew louder, but the water itself remained difficult to see. Every few minutes, Mateo's tablet chimed. Station Mesa moved again. Each new position stayed ahead of them. He stopped walking. The next packet arrived while they stood still. The coordinate did not change. Mateo took 10 steps forward. Another packet came. The station moved 10 steps farther up the canyon. Dana removed her glasses and wiped them on her shirt, though both lenses were already wet. "Turn off the map," she said. Mateo switched to the raw telemetry screen. Station Mesa reported a water depth of 4 feet. Their boots stood on exposed limestone at the same elevation. The tablet chimed again. 5 feet. From somewhere ahead came a short electronic chirp. It was the sound the field logger made when its magnetic switch was activated. Mateo lifted his headlamp. A green light blinked through the rain. It stood at the next bend, low to the ground. They approached carefully. The light vanished when their beams reached it. In its place, they found a shallow puddle with a broken insect wing floating at the center. Station Mesa sent another coordinate. Ahead again. Mateo called the resource office. The reply arrived in fragments. The duty ranger said the 2 maintenance workers had evacuated toward higher ground. He ordered Mateo and Dana to return. They turned downhill. The route behind them no longer matched the grade they had climbed. Water crossed the bench from right to left, flowing away from the wash and toward the base of the cliff. Mateo crouched and placed 2 fingers in it. The current pressed uphill against his hand. He looked for wind effects, a hidden slope, anything that would make the movement ordinary. Small leaves floated with the water. They traveled toward higher contour lines on his map. The tablet chimed. Station Mesa was now behind them. Dana took the device and rotated it. Maybe the compass is reversed. Mateo pointed toward a survey monument set in the rock. He had recorded its elevation himself. The coordinate display was not reversed. The station had crossed their position without passing them. The green light blinked below, once, twice. Then it held steady. A deep rolling sound rose from the lower canyon. It resembled thunder, but it did not fade. The limestone beneath their boots gave a faint vibration. Mateo had heard flash floods before. They announced themselves through boulders and trapped air long before the leading water arrived. The sound was coming uphill. He and Dana left the bench and climbed toward the cliff. Loose gravel slid beneath their boots. Mateo found a narrow shelf above the old trail and anchored the rope around a juniper trunk. Dana climbed first. Lightning flashed over the canyon. Below them, a broad front of muddy water rounded the bend. Foam, branches, and pale stones crowded its leading edge. The flood moved upstream. It climbed through water already running downhill without flattening or breaking apart. The 2 currents crossed in the channel. For several seconds, each kept its own direction. Then the uphill front struck the base of their slope. Mateo climbed the rope. His right boot slipped from the limestone and struck Dana's knee. She caught the back of his harness and held him against the wall until he found another foothold. The shelf above them ended beneath an overhang. They pressed into it as muddy water spread across the bench below. Mateo's tablet continued chiming inside his jacket. Each alert reported a greater depth, 6 feet, 8 feet, 11 feet. The green light appeared on the opposite wall of the canyon. It blinked far above the water at the exact height of their ledge. Dana turned off her headlamp. The light remained. Mateo removed the tablet battery. The screen went black. Across the canyon, the green light blinked once more. Then it appeared higher. They climbed. The rope reached a sloping ramp above the overhang. Dana went first and placed protection around another juniper. Mateo followed with both hands on the rope. Rain ran through his sleeves and filled his gloves. Behind them, the rolling sound stopped. No gradual retreat followed. One moment the canyon shook with moving stone. The next held only rainfall. They remained on the high slope until the storm weakened near dawn. When daylight reached the escarpment, the wash below looked ordinary. Mud coated the banks. Broken branches pointed downstream. No debris pointed the other way. A ranger team reached them shortly after sunrise. Mateo guided the team to the original Station Mesa location. The sensor was still bolted to its steel post beneath the pour-off. Its housing was dry inside. The antenna cable was intact. The navigation receiver showed a fixed position within a few feet of the installation coordinates. The green status light blinked when Mateo opened the cover. He closed it immediately. The official review blamed timestamp corruption, radio multipath, and temporary backwater created by a debris jam. Those explanations accounted for most of the readings when considered separately. They did not explain the order in which the stations had triggered. The investigation also concluded that darkness, lightning, and uneven terrain had distorted Mateo and Dana's perception of flow direction. Photographs from the lower gauges showed ordinary downstream flooding. The raw file from Station Mesa was excluded because its position data failed quality control standards. Mateo kept a copy. When he plotted the rejected coordinates, they formed a line along his evacuation route. Every point remained the same distance ahead of him and Dana. The final point sat on the high slope where the green light had appeared after the tablet battery was removed. The last record carried a timestamp from the following night. Mateo continued working at the park for another year. He stopped using live maps during storms. He carried paper contours and wrote every coordinate by hand. Dana returned to volunteer work, but she would not enter Pine Spring Canyon during monsoon season. If someone asked why, she said only that a surveyor should never follow a point that refuses to stay in the ground. Mateo later took a water quality position in El Paso. His apartment overlooked streets that flooded after summer rain. He could hear tires moving through the water below, always in the direction gravity required. Even so, when thunder begins, he walks from room to room with a roll of black electrical tape and covers every green status light before the first alert can blink. Story 3. Nia Brooks smelled diesel before she saw the fuel on the floor. One of the cans beside the visitor center generator had tipped during the afternoon wind check. The cap held, but a thin line had leaked around the vent. Nia set the can upright, spread absorbent pads beneath it, and wrote the spill in the facility log. Rain struck the service yard in quick bursts. Between them, the old-growth canopy rolled under the wind. Branches scraped the roof, then lifted away. The park had closed that morning for the tropical storm. Campers had been cleared from Longleaf and Bluff campgrounds. Cedar Creek permits were suspended. The entrance gate carried an orange closure panel, an emergency contact number, and a copy of the superintendent's order sealed inside plastic. Nia had installed the panel herself. She knew which carriage bolts held it, where the bottom corner bent, and how much mud covered the left post. Before dark, she drove the paved loop twice. She checked the campgrounds, the canoe access, and the maintenance compound. At each stop, she called her location to dispatcher Celia Ward. Nia worked law enforcement, but storm closures involved more gates than arrests. She photographed barricades, moved fallen limbs, and explained to drivers that an empty parking lot did not mean an empty floodplain. Water could arrive long after rain stopped falling. At the lower boardwalk entrance, she found a child's red rain boot beside the railing. It had been there since the previous week. She placed it in the patrol truck so nobody would report it as evidence during the storm. By 7, the last facilities employee had left. Nia remained on duty because high water often drew the same people that closure signs were meant to discourage. Some came to take photographs. Others came to hunt where they thought no ranger would be watching. Celia called as Nia passed the visitor center. County has trees down on Bluff Road. Nearest backup may be delayed. Copy. Do not make me send someone through a hurricane to find you. Nia told her she planned to stay board. The first false sign stood near the service entrance to Weston Lake Loop Trail. Its reflective surface caught her headlights through the rain. The sign read emergency exit and pointed away from the visitor center, toward a low section of floodplain already taking water. Nia stopped the truck. No evacuation route went that way. She photographed the sign through the windshield, then approached on foot. The lettering matched National Park Service stock closely enough to pass in bad weather. Even the brown border had been measured. The back exposed the mistake. Park signs used square-neck carriage bolts. This one had shiny hardware store screws. Fresh saw marks crossed the wooden post. No mud had splashed the lower edge. Nia called Celia and requested a check with facilities. The answer came within a minute. No employee had installed an emergency sign on Weston Lake Loop. No crew was still working inside the closure. Nia pulled the sign from the soft ground and placed it beside the patrol truck. As she lifted it, her radio opened on the park's monitored visitor assistance channel. A woman spoke through heavy static. "We are trapped by the water. There are 3 of us." Nia raised the radio. Calling station, this is Park Ranger Brooks. Give your location. The woman coughed once. Near Oak Ridge. The signs brought us this way. The transmission ended. Nia asked Celia to begin a trace and check the permit list. No visitors were authorized in the backcountry. That did not mean the park was empty. The voice returned. We are trapped by the water. There are 3 of us. The same cough followed. Nia listened to the breathing between words. It repeated at the same intervals. She recorded the next transmission on her body camera. Near Oak Ridge. The signs brought us this way. The static ended at the exact same point. It was a recording. Nia requested county deputies and another park ranger. Celia advised that both primary roads were blocked by trees. Response time was unknown. Nia could have waited. Instead, she drove to the nearest high access point, parked facing out, and entered far enough to locate the transmitter. If someone had placed a recorded distress call inside a closed park, leaving it active would draw any responding unit toward it. Water covered the trail in shallow sheets. Nia moved beside the marked tread and tested each step with a pole. Bald cypress knees broke the surface around her. Every gust sent water down from the canopy in a separate rainstorm. The recording played again. This time it came from the forest ahead, not from her shoulder radio. We are trapped by the water. Nia stopped. The voice sounded thin and mechanical beneath the trees. She followed it to another false sign. A handheld radio had been sealed inside a food container and screwed to the back. A wire ran from the radio to a timer. The container also held a motion sensor. Someone had designed the transmission to begin when a person approached the sign. Nia removed the battery and marked the location. Beyond it, strips of reflective tape led deeper into the floodplain. The tape was tied at eye level and placed close enough for a person with a flashlight to follow. The real trail turned north. The false route continued east toward Oak Ridge. Nia smelled diesel. It did not belong to her truck. The wind carried it from somewhere ahead, mixed with wet wood and tannin water. Then she heard the generator. The motor ran low and uneven. It missed every few seconds, recovered, and missed again. Nia reported the sound and direction. Celia told her backup had entered from the north boundary but remained more than half an hour away. Hold your position, Celia said. Nia moved to higher ground where she could observe without following the reflective tape. The generator led her toward a natural levee above the surrounding water. A blue tarp appeared between the trees. Beneath it stood an illegal camp built from pallets and salvaged lumber. Fuel cans lined one side. A small generator powered a printer, a radio scanner, and 2 battery chargers. Fresh closure signs lay stacked against a tree. Nia used her camera zoom. The camp contained a laminator, rolls of reflective vinyl, park maps, and trail register pages. Photographs had been pinned to a plywood wall. Several showed marked patrol vehicles at different park entrances. One showed Nia locking the campground gate 3 days earlier. Beside the photographs hung a yellow dry bag reported stolen from Cedar Creek access during the summer. The generator stopped. Its last rotation produced a soft metallic knock. Nia backed away from the levee. Water pressed against her boot soles. Footsteps entered the water behind her. They were slow and deliberate. The person making them did not need to search for solid ground. Ranger Brooks. The man's voice came from her left. Nia turned. He stood between 2 tupelo trees wearing a green rain jacket and hip boots. His beard was trimmed close. A short shotgun rested across his chest. The muzzle pointed toward the water between them. Mud stained his sleeves. Diesel darkened one glove. A hardware store receipt protruded from his jacket pocket. Put the radio down, he said. Nia lowered her hand without releasing it. People are coming. They always do. Nia's thumb pressed against the emergency button through her glove. He stepped closer and told her to walk toward the camp. Nia pressed the emergency button on her radio as she turned. The unit gave no confirmation tone. The man followed several paces behind. He knew the ground. He avoided submerged routes without looking down. Nia recognized the levee from flood surveys. An abandoned channel curved along its south side. During normal water, the slough looked like flat forest floor. During flood, leaf litter floated across the surface and concealed a drop deeper than a person was tall. She angled toward it. The man corrected her. Stay with the tape. Nia moved back toward the reflective markers, then stumbled against a cypress knee. She let the radio fall from her hand. He looked down at it. That was enough. Nia stepped onto a submerged log she had seen beneath the water. She crossed the narrow edge of the old channel in 2 strides. The man followed. His first boot found the log. His second came down beside it. The leaf-covered surface opened. Water rose to his chest. The shotgun struck a root and left his hands. He caught the bank, but his hip boots filled and pulled his legs beneath the surface. Nia drew her sidearm and aimed from the opposite edge. Hands on the log. He stared at her, breathing through his mouth. Both hands. He obeyed. Nia recovered her radio with the pole and called Celia. The emergency signal had transmitted. Backup was 12 minutes away. She kept the man against the log until 2 county deputies and a park ranger reached them from the north. They pulled him from the slough, secured his hands, and walked him out along the real trail. His name was Calvin Reese. He had lived in the floodplain for almost 4 months. A previous conviction involved impersonating a utility worker to enter rural homes after storms. Investigators found 6 recorded distress messages at the camp. Reese had built them from emergency training files and short clips recorded near the visitor center. He used the calls to predict which entrance a responding ranger would take. The false closure signs controlled the rest of the route. The search also recovered stolen radios, dry bags, license plates, camping gear, and notebooks listing vehicle descriptions. Some entries included arrival times and whether the driver had been alone. Reese never explained why the photographs of Nia were grouped separately. The federal case focused on weapons possession, theft, interference with agency operations, and impersonation. The incident summary described the recordings as devices used to divert emergency personnel. It did not describe what waited at the end of the marked route. After the arrest, facilities removed 23 false signs from the floodplain. Several stood in areas Nia had never approached that night. All of them pointed toward the camp. The park changed its closure procedure. Signs received numbered seals. Rangers photographed the front, back, hardware, and surrounding ground after installation. Nia returned to patrol within a week. She still worked storm closures, but she no longer trusted a sign from the driver's seat. She stopped, turned it over, and checked the bolts with her hand. She also stopped leaving her patrol truck running. Now, whenever she reaches a closed trail in heavy rain, she shuts off the engine and opens the door. She waits there until the truck's exhaust clears, listening for a generator and checking whether the smell of diesel remains. Story 4. Evan Sutter could identify Molly Reyes by the way she said the word uncertain. She drew out the middle syllable when she was looking at a salmon red, partly erased by current. During their surveys, Evan usually worked upstream, while Molly followed with the waterproof field book. He would point to a depression in the gravel, and her voice would come through the rain behind him. Mark it uncertain. By the end of the season, the phrase had become a joke between them. They were working on a small island in the Wrangell Ranger District, counting spawning coho in a short creek that emptied into a protected cove. The survey required a live count, a carcass count, and a record of every visible red. Water temperature loggers near the mouth had to be downloaded before winter. Evan carried flagging, calipers, bear spray, and the data shuttle. Molly carried the field book, a handheld radio, and a dry bag filled with spare gloves. Both wore chest waders and inflatable life vests. The morning began with low clouds and calm water. Eli James brought them from Wrangell in a Forest Service skiff. He had grown up running boats through the islands and knew where every channel became shallow at low tide. Before leaving, he checked the marine forecast again. "Wind comes early. Stay in the cabin," he said. The plan was to finish the survey by mid-afternoon. Eli would return before the front reached the cove. The creek ran clear over dark gravel. Coho held beneath root tangles, their backs barely moving against the current. Evan measured channel width while Molly recorded pool depth and canopy cover. Near the upper reach, they found a red broken by recent high water. Evan pointed with his wading staff. "You calling that one?" Molly leaned over the field book. "Mark it uncertain." Her voice traveled between the spruce trunks and returned from the opposite bank, thinner than before. Neither of them paid attention. They finished shortly after 2. The first wind reached the island as they packed the temperature logger. Branches tapped together above the creek. The cove changed from smooth gray water to narrow black lines. Eli called on the marine radio. The front had accelerated. He could not cross the open channel safely. They were to shelter overnight in the Forest Service cabin and wait for a morning pickup. Evan and Molly had food, sleeping bags, an oil heater, and an emergency beacon. Overnight delays were part of fieldwork in the Tongass. Molly had packed instant coffee, powdered cocoa, and 4 peanut butter packets she had taken from the district break room. Evan carried a dented steel mug painted with a coho his daughter had drawn. They had spent enough nights in remote cabins to know that dry socks mattered more than an extra meal, and that every fuel valve should be checked twice. They pulled the skiff above the predicted high tide and secured it to 2 spruce trees. Evan used separate bow and stern lines. Molly photographed both knots for the vessel log. The cabin stood a short distance inland. It had 2 bunks, a table, a small stove, and shutters that never closed evenly. Someone had left a deck of damp playing cards beside the visitor register. Molly cooked rice and canned salmon while Evan entered survey data. Rain began on the roof in isolated drops. Within minutes, it became continuous. At 6, Evan stepped outside to bring in the fuel can. The island had almost disappeared. Rain filled the space between the cabin and the beach. Waves struck the gravel with a dragging sound as they pulled back. Evan lifted the can. Molly called from the north shore. "Evan, bring the light." He looked toward the sound. The trees blocked the beach. "Molly," the cabin door opened behind him. Molly stood in the doorway holding a cooking spoon. "What?" Evan kept his eyes on the trees. "Did you call me?" She shook her head. They went inside and checked both radios. The marine unit had received no transmission. Molly's handheld remained on the table beside the field book. Wind could carry voices from fishing boats. An open microphone could catch anyone using a nearby channel. The islands bent sound around shorelines in ways that made distance unreliable. Evan closed the door. The voice came again 20 minutes later. "Evan, bring the light." This time it came from the south end of the cove. Molly sat across from him. She had been reading tide times aloud when the voice interrupted her. Neither radio showed a receive light. Evan crossed to the shutter and opened it 1 inch. Rain struck his cheek through the gap. The voice called from farther down the beach. "The skiff is moving." Molly looked toward the peg beside the door. Her yellow rain jacket hung there, dripping into a pan. Evan switched on the exterior floodlight. Its beam reached only the first spruce trunks. Water moved through their roots. Nothing stood between them. He called Eli on the marine radio. The connection broke under static, but Evan managed to describe the voice. Eli asked one question. "Is Molly beside you?" "Yes. Keep her there. Do not answer the beach." The transmission ended. Molly asked what Eli meant. Evan said he did not know. For the next hour, the voice moved around the island. It called from the creek mouth, then from a rocky point beyond the cove. Each time it sounded like Molly. It used her pauses and the slight whistle she made through her front teeth. Once it laughed the way she had laughed that morning when Evan dropped a measuring tape into the creek. Later, it spoke the survey phrase. "Market uncertain." Molly closed the field book. The tide rose beneath the storm surge. Gravel rolled under each wave. The sound moved closer until it seemed to come from directly below the cabin windows. Evan checked the skiff through the gap in the shutter. He could not see it, but the mooring line should have remained above the water. A rope snapped outside. The sound was sharp and unmistakable. The voice called from the beach. "Evan, the skiff." The cabin's exterior bell began striking the wall. It hung near the door on a short cord and was meant to help visitors locate the cabin in fog. Wind pushed it sideways. Evan and Molly put on dry suits over their clothes. They clipped a safety line between their harnesses and attached the other end to the cabin's foundation post. Molly held his arm before he opened the door. "If you hear me out there, look at me first." Evan nodded. They stepped into the storm together. Rain flattened the beam of Evan's headlamp. The path to the beach had become a shallow stream. Spruce roots shifted beneath the mud. From the north shore, Molly's voice shouted his name. The real Molly tightened the line between them. From the south shore, the same voice answered. Even. They reached the cove. One bowline had broken. The skiff swung broadside in the surge, held only by the stern line. Each wave lifted the hull and dropped it onto the gravel. Evan moved toward the bow. Molly stayed near the stern tree and fed him rope. Something whistled from across the water. It was low and soft, almost hidden beneath the wind. Molly turned her head toward it. The voice spoke from the opposite shore. I found the line. Evan looked at Molly. Her mouth was closed. A headlamp appeared across the cove. It moved behind the rain at the height of a person walking along the tide line. The light stopped when Evan stopped. Then it continued toward the creek mouth. Molly's yellow jacket was visible beneath it. Evan looked back toward the cabin. The same jacket no longer hung beside the door. Only the empty peg showed in the floodlight. The stern line pulled tight. The skiff began moving away from the beach. Evan grabbed the gunwale. A wave lifted the hull and dragged him knee-deep into the cove. Cold water entered one glove and ran along his wrist. Molly hauled on the safety line. Her voice came from beside him. Let it go. At the same moment, her voice called from the black water beyond the skiff. Do not let go. Evan released the boat. The stern rope slid across the spruce trunk. Its knot remained intact, but the line continued paying out as if much more rope existed beyond the coil they had tied. Molly cut it with her rescue knife. The skiff turned once and vanished beyond the floodlight. From the cove came a short laugh. The spruce above the cabin cracked. Evan heard the trunk split before he saw it move. He and Molly ran inland as the upper half fell across the roof. The impact drove the shutters open and scattered sparks from the stovepipe. They reached a rock bench above the cabin and sheltered beneath a tarp. Evan kept one hand on Molly's harness until daylight. The voice continued for most of the night. It called from the cove. It called from the creek. Once, it spoke from the trees behind them and asked Evan to bring the field book. Molly remained beside him without speaking. Near dawn, the wind shifted. The calls stopped with it. Eli reached the island after 9. He found them on the rock bench, soaked but uninjured. The cabin roof was damaged, and the survey skiff was gone. Evan told him about the voice while Molly packed their equipment. Eli watched the cove. My grandfather called it Kushtaka, he said. I will not say more here. The skiff was recovered 2 days later on another island across the channel. The fuel tank, emergency kit, and radio remained aboard. Investigators found no mechanical failure. The cut stern line was still tied to the cleat. The other end carried several yards of rope that did not belong to the Forest Service inventory. It had been joined to their line with a wet knot neither Evan nor Molly recognized. The incident report blamed storm surge, failed mooring equipment, and auditory confusion caused by high wind. The moving headlamp was listed as a probable fishing vessel seen through rain. No fishing vessel reported entering the cove. Their field recorder had captured several calls. An audio review found that each matched Molly's voice closely, but the storm noise prevented a reliable comparison. The recording was archived with the damaged equipment file. Evan completed the season. He continued fisheries work, though he stopped accepting island assignments that required overnight shelter. Molly transferred to a mainland watershed team. She never again used the phrase "market uncertain." Evan still works around water. When someone calls his name across a river, harbor, or stretch of open beach, he does not wave or call back. He raises his binoculars and waits until he can see the speaker's mouth move. Story 5. Leah Corbin drew a white chalk triangle around the first survey station. The brass marker was no wider than her thumbnail. It had been drilled into the limestone decades earlier and appeared on 3 generations of cave maps. The triangle made it easier to find when headlamps flattened the wall into gray stone. Leah checked the station label against the trip sheet. Thomas Bell, the physical science technician, read the identifier back to her. Their cartographer, Iris Dean, entered it into the survey tablet. The 3 of them stood inside a restricted section of the Mammoth Cave system. The passage had been closed to routine travel after a sediment bank began shifting near a lower drainage route. Several days of rain had raised groundwater levels, and a turbidity sensor had stopped transmitting. Their assignment was to inspect the sensor, photograph the sediment, and resurvey the connecting passage. Leah prepared survey trips in the same order every time. She wrapped orange tape around sharpened pencils so they could be found in mud. She placed fresh silica packets inside the instrument case and wrote each battery voltage on the trip sheet. Thomas packed cheese crackers in a specimen bag because cave mice had chewed through his lunch the month before. Iris carried a folded paper map even when the tablet was working. She called it the map that could not run out of power. Leah had spent the morning preparing as carefully as she would for an overnight trip. She signed the cave entry log, listed their route and expected exit time, and left a sealed copy of the sketch map with the surface contact. Each helmet carried 3 independent light sources. Each pack held food, water, a thermal layer, spare batteries, and a compact first aid kit. The team cleaned and inspected every item before entry. Boots and coveralls had been decontaminated under the park's cave protocol. Nothing used in another cave went underground without treatment. Thomas calibrated the laser rangefinder against a measured bar in the equipment room. Iris checked the inclinometer and compass. Leah tested the cave radio at the entrance. All readings were normal. At the first station, they began the traverse. Leah aimed the laser at a reflective target held by Thomas. The instrument measured distance and inclination. Iris recorded the azimuth, station height, passage width, and ceiling height. Then they moved the target ahead and repeated the process. A proper traverse behaved like a chain. Each measured link connected to the next. If the route ended at another known station, the software compared the calculated position with the mapped position and reported the error. This route connected 2 known passages. The entrance station stood on an upper level. The final station lay more than 80 vertical feet below it. The first hour passed without trouble. They moved through a broad tube where old water lines crossed the walls. Farther in, the ceiling lowered and the floor broke into blocks of limestone. Water tapped inside narrow cracks but did not yet cross the route. Leah inspected drip points while Thomas downloaded a logger. Iris drew passage outlines on the tablet and complained that cave mud had already found the only gap in her glove. At a descending slot, Thomas set the target against the next station. The laser gave its confirmation chirp. Leah had not pressed the measure button. She lowered the instrument. "Did you trigger yours?" Thomas looked at the reflective target. It had no electronics. Leah pressed the button. The rangefinder chirped again and displayed a distance consistent with the sketch. She blamed pressure on the trigger while moving. The instrument's rubber housing was old, and grit sometimes collected beneath the controls. They descended. Each drop carried them farther below the upper passage. Iris recorded negative inclination after negative inclination. The traverse line on the tablet bent downward through the mapped limestone. At the 9th station, the software displayed a loop closure message. Iris stopped. "It says we are back at the start." Leah checked the screen. The calculated coordinates matched the first brass marker within less than an inch. Elevation matched as well. That was impossible. They had descended ropes, crawled beneath a low bedding plane, and moved several hundred feet through the passage. Leah inspected the station list. No duplicate names appeared. The previous shots showed the correct lengths and downward angles. She assumed Iris had selected the first station as the endpoint by mistake. They deleted the final entry and shot it again. The laser chirped before Leah touched the button. The same coordinates appeared. Thomas turned in a slow circle. Their headlamps passed over scalloped walls and a ceiling no more than 4 feet high. "No brass marker here," he said. Leah backed out of the software and opened the raw measurements. The numbers described a continuous descent. When processed, the traverse folded upward on the last shot and closed at the entrance. They performed the next check without software. Thomas hung a plumb line from the tripod while Leah read the mechanical inclinometer. Iris copied every value onto paper and added the elevation changes by hand. Their result placed them deep below the starting station. Leah measured the last leg in reverse. The forward and backward distances agreed. The inclinations carried opposite signs as they should. When Iris entered the reverse shot, the handwritten calculation remained below the entrance, while the tablet placed them directly on top of it. They replaced the rangefinder battery. Iris restarted the tablet. Thomas took an independent distance with a tape. The tape and laser agreed. They continued to the next station to isolate the error. The passage turned left around a block of breakdown. White calcite marked the corners. Beyond it, they found a smooth wall with a brass survey marker. A chalk triangle surrounded it. The chalk was fresh. Fine white dust still lay on the narrow ledge beneath the mark. Leah placed her fingers near it without touching. The triangle matched the one she had drawn at the entrance. The left side extended slightly past the lower point where the chalk had slipped. Iris checked the label stamped into the brass. It was the entrance station. Thomas looked back along the passage. Every shot of the traverse had taken them downward. No climb had returned them to the upper level. Leah called the surface contact through the cave radio. The reply arrived faintly but clearly. Their signal was being received near the lower passage, not the entrance. She asked for the control station elevation. The surface ranger read the same value printed on their trip sheet. Leah gave their current air temperature, humidity, and estimated depth. Then, she told the ranger they had encountered a duplicate marker and were beginning their exit. She did not say the word loop. They turned around. The route behind them reached the first junction sooner than it should have. Iris counted 4 left-hand turns on the trip in. Returning, they took 4 right-hand turns. The chalk triangle appeared again before they reached the rope drop. This time it was on the opposite wall. The brass marker carried the same stamped identifier. Thomas scraped mud from his boot against the floor. "We have not climbed." Water began running somewhere ahead. They heard it first as a low, continuous murmur beneath the drip sounds. Then brown water entered along the floor and spread around their boots. Leah checked the drainage arrows on the map. Runoff should have moved toward the lower river passage. The water came from the direction of the mapped exit. They took the other branch. It curved left through a narrow canyon and returned to the chalk triangle. Iris placed an orange marker on the floor. They passed it again less than 10 minutes later, approaching from the opposite direction. The cave radio gave the laser's confirmation chirp. No one held the rangefinder. It sat inside Leah's closed pack. The sound came again from beyond the chalked wall. Thomas pressed his ear against the limestone. A cool draft moved across his cheek from a crack beside the marker. Leah held a strip of survey ribbon near it. The ribbon lifted toward the wall. Airflow meant space. They moved loose rocks from the base. Behind them, water covered the orange marker and reached their ankles. The opening widened into a vertical slot. It did not appear on the map. Leah aimed her headlamp inside and saw breakdown rising at a steep angle. Thomas entered first. Iris passed the packs through. Leah remained outside long enough to mark the opening with a reflective arrow. The laser chirped from her pack. Across the passage, a red point appeared at the center of the chalk triangle. The rangefinder was pointed away from the wall. Leah crawled into the slot. Water reached the opening as she pulled her legs through. Thomas climbed above her and cleared loose stones by hand. Iris found an old rusted survey tag wedged beneath a ledge, but its identifier did not exist on their map. They climbed until the draft strengthened. The slot opened into a dry walking passage. A known marker appeared near the ceiling. Iris recognized it as part of an upper survey line located far from their planned route. The cave radio connected immediately. Their surface contact directed them toward an established exit. They emerged more than 4 hours after their expected time. Rain continued across the sinkhole plain above them. A recovery team entered the closed passage after groundwater levels fell. They found the tripod, the orange floor marker, and the turbidity sensor. They found only one chalk triangle. It surrounded the original entrance station. The duplicate brass markers were not located. The vertical slot used by Leah's team could not be found from either mapped passage. Searchers detected no airflow near the wall. The recovery team photographed the passage from floor to ceiling and compared the images with the video from Leah's helmet camera. The smooth limestone surrounding the duplicate station did not match any wall along the route. Her reflective arrow was never recovered. The survey equipment passed inspection. Its internal log preserved every raw measurement. Analysts processed the traverse with 2 different software systems. Both produced a closed loop. The total horizontal error was less than an inch. The vertical error was 0. The final technical memorandum attributed the result to duplicated station identifiers, operator disorientation, and corrupted inclination values. The storm runoff was considered the immediate safety hazard. The raw inclination file was attached to the memorandum. Every value showed descent. Leah returned to cave work after a month. She would map open traverses, but she stopped closing loops underground. If a route connected 2 known stations, she assigned it to another survey lead. Thomas left the Park Service the following year. Iris kept the tablet screenshots, though the project directory was later replaced with a corrected survey. Leah now lives in a small house outside Bowling Green. Her hallway is straight, with a bedroom at one end and the kitchen at the other. A strip of white tape forms a triangle beside each doorway. When heavy rain starts, she sets a laser measure against the bedroom wall and checks the distance to the kitchen twice before turning off the lights. Story 6. The first sound Gabriel Thibodeau heard that morning was rainwater ticking from the visitor center roof into an empty crawfish bucket. The storm had moved east before dawn. It left the preserve closed, the parking lot striped with cypress needles, and brown water standing over the low parts of the access road. Gabriel arrived while the sky was still the color of a dirty sheet. He parked beside the resource management shed and watched the bucket fill for a moment before unlocking the door. Inside, he started coffee in a dented drip machine. Then he laid his field gear across the workbench in the same order he always used. Radio, handheld location unit, spare batteries, flagging tape, nitrile gloves, mosquito head net, data sheets sealed in a plastic clipboard. At the end of the bench sat a bag of canned sardines. The bait stations were part of a small mammal survey along the transition from bottomland forest to swamp. Each station had a wire scent cage fixed to a cypress knee or a driven stake. The bait stayed inside the cage where animals could smell it but not eat it. A strip of barbed wire collected hair. A camera, mounted knee-high, recorded whatever came close. Gabriel disliked sardines before sunrise, but raccoons did not care his schedule. He checked the storm log. The southern pressure sensor had failed shortly after midnight. 2 water level gauges had stopped transmitting. Wind gusts had pushed above the limit for field travel, and every public trail remained closed pending inspection. The bait stations were not traps, so no animal could be held inside them. Still, the cameras and cages had to be checked before another band of rain arrived. His supervisor, Celeste Moran, called over the radio as he loaded a shallow draft skiff at Twin Canals. "You have the old route sheet." Gabriel patted the clipboard against his chest. "Laminated and impossible to lose. You said that about a canoe paddle. The canal kept it. Static cracked between them." Then Celeste said, "Call at every second station. If the water rises over the spoil bank, turn around." Gabriel pushed off beneath branches bent low by the storm. The outboard coughed twice before catching, its small engine before catching. It carried him south between walls of buttonbush and palmetto. The swamp was never quiet. Water dripped from leaves. Tree frogs clicked from hidden pockets above the flood line. Somewhere beyond the canal, a barred owl gave one unfinished call and stopped. The boat nudged floating mats of duckweed aside, leaving a black seam that slowly closed behind him. Before leaving the launch, he inspected the spare control cage bolted beneath the equipment shelter. Everything looked ordinary. The camera housing was wet, but sealed. The wire cage remained clipped shut with a double-action carabiner. Gabriel photographed the station, replaced the swollen bait packet, and rubbed a spot of rust from the cage hinge with his thumb. The metal left an orange streak across his glove. It smelled like wet iron. He recorded the odor as corroded hardware, more out of habit than necessity. Resource work trained people to write down small things. A loose bracket became a lost camera. A fresh boot print became evidence of an unauthorized hunter. Details mattered later. The first survey station stood deep in the trees, where the canal narrowed and bald cypress trunks rose from the water like gray columns. Gabriel cut the engine and pulled the skiff through submerged brush. He heard the cage door tapping before he saw it. Tin against wire, a light, patient click. The door hung open toward the water. Its carabiner rested on the mud below, still locked. Gabriel crouched in the bow. The cage had been mounted with its opening facing the spoil bank, so he could service it from dry ground. Now the entire cage had been rotated on its stake. The opening faced the swamp. Storm debris could turn equipment. A raccoon could work a loose latch. Neither explanation accounted for the locked carabiner lying 6 inches away. He stepped onto the bank and found a barefoot print beside the stake. It was narrow through the heel and broad at the toes. Rain had softened its edges, but the 5 toe marks were clear. Another print lay ahead of it, then another, forming a line out of the flooded brush. Gabriel followed them with his eyes. They ended after 7 steps. There was no patch of hard ground, no fallen log, no deeper channel where the person might have begun swimming. The last print pressed into glossy mud beneath a dwarf palmetto. Beyond it, the surface was untouched. The wet iron smell began there. It was stronger than rust on a hinge. Gabriel tasted it behind his front teeth. He checked the palmetto for a cut animal or exposed scrap metal and found neither. He backed toward the boat without turning around. Mosquitoes whined against his ears. When his heel touched the gunwale, the cage door tapped once behind him. Gabriel called Celeste and reported probable human interference. "Any shoe prints?" she asked. "Bare feet." The radio hissed for several seconds. "After that storm, that is what I have." Celeste told him to photograph everything and skip any station that required waiting. Her voice stayed practical, which helped. Gabriel measured the print, marked the station disturbed, and sealed the carabiner in an evidence bag. At the second station, the cage had also been turned toward the swamp. Its door stood open. The camera lens pointed straight down. A line of barefoot tracks crossed the spoil bank from east to west, each print filled with clear water, although the surrounding puddles were brown. The tracks stopped at the edge of the wet iron smell. Gabriel did not follow them. He called his second station check, then removed the camera card. The final file had been recorded shortly before the storm sensor failed. Rain streaked the image. Palmetto leaves shook across one corner. For several seconds, nothing occupied the frame. Then came the sound of the cage latch. One click as the safety sleeve turned, a second as the gate opened. The camera did not show a hand. It showed only the cage shifting toward the water while something outside the frame breathed through its nose. "Slow in, slow out." Gabriel stopped playback. He had grown up in Lafitte hearing men identify animals by sound through walls. Nutria gnawed in short bursts. Raccoons fussed with their paws. Feral hogs pushed and grunted. This breath was too even for an animal working a latch, and too close to the microphone for the camera to have missed a person standing beside it. He placed the card in a dry case. Rain began again. It struck the palmetto in broad drops, then reached the canal and covered the water with dimples. Gabriel pulled on his head net and checked the route sheet. 2 stations remained beyond the old oil access canal. He should have returned. Instead, he told himself that 2 more opened cages would establish a pattern for law enforcement. The sky still held some light. The water had not crossed the spoil bank. His engine was running well. He continued south. At the 3rd station, no tracks appeared at all. The cage had been opened from the swamp side and set neatly on the ground. Its mounting wire had been untwisted rather than broken. 3 turns, each one clean. The smell waited 10 feet beyond it. At the 4th, the cage door hung open toward the swamp. Barefoot prints came out of water, deep enough to cover Gabriel's waist. They climbed the bank, circled the cage, and stopped beneath the camera. On the other side of that final print, wet iron filled the air. He pressed the transmit button. Only static answered. Gabriel raised the radio over his head and tried again. A broken piece of Celeste's voice came through, then vanished under a low pulse that repeated every few seconds. Not speech, breathing. He switched channels. The breathing remained. Gabriel turned the radio off. The real sound continued from across the canal. It came through cane and buttonbush at the same measured pace. Slow in, slow out. Water moved between the breaths, though nothing broke the surface. Gabriel kept his eyes on the skiff and walked backward toward it. His calves struck the aluminum hull. He climbed in, lowered the engine, and pulled the starter cord. The cord snapped back into his palm. He tried again. The engine turned but did not catch. Across the canal, the breathing stopped. Something touched the cage behind him. The latch sleeve rotated with a dry metallic rasp. Gabriel had just closed that cage. He had checked it twice. He did not look. He pumped the fuel bulb, set the choke, and pulled until the muscles beneath his shoulder began to shake. On the fourth pull, the engine coughed. On the fifth, it started. Gabriel pushed the throttle hard enough to lift the bow. Branches struck his sleeves as the skiff entered the narrow canal. Floating debris knocked under the hull. He kept the engine centered in the deepest water, using the old spoil piles as landmarks while rain erased the far bank. Halfway back to Twin Canals, the smell reached him again. Wet iron. It came from the empty bow. Gabriel looked down. A single barefoot print shone on the aluminum deck beside the sealed camera case. It was made of clear water. 5 long toe marks pointed toward him. He wiped it away with a rag and threw the rag overboard. Then he kept both hands on the tiller until the launch appeared through the rain. Celeste was waiting under the shelter with Amos Guidry from maintenance. Gabriel tied the skiff without speaking. His fingers slipped twice on the same knot. Celeste asked where the rest of the station checks were. Still out there. She studied his face, then the evidence bag in his hand. Amos leaned over the boat. He was an old man who had repaired boardwalks in the preserve longer than Gabriel had worked for the park. "You spill fuel?" Amos asked. Gabriel shook his head. Amos smelled the air once, his mouth flattened. "My grandmère called plenty things a rougarou," he said. "She never named one while her feet were wet. That was all." They locked the skiff in the equipment yard. Law enforcement postponed a return until the next morning because water had risen across the southern route. Gabriel spent the afternoon downloading camera files while Celeste opened an incident record. The third camera showed rain. The fourth recorded the sound of its latch opening. Then the image tilted down toward the mud. Bare feet stood under the lens. They did not move for 11 minutes. No legs appeared above the ankles. The upper half of the frame was gray rain, as if the feet belonged to someone standing beyond the camera's field of view. That was not possible at the angle Gabriel had mounted it. The final frames were corrupted. The following day, 2 law enforcement rangers and a wildlife technician traveled the route. They found storm damage, feral hog sign, and evidence that a person had handled the stations. They found no barefoot tracks. The smell was gone. Every cage door was closed and clipped with a carabiner. Even the missing one had been replaced. The replacement was not park property. It was an older steel model with a threaded sleeve, polished smooth by years of use. The official report classified the event as unauthorized equipment disturbance following severe weather. The breathing on the audio was attributed to wind crossing a damaged microphone. The bare feet in the video were listed as an unresolved imaging artifact, likely caused by water on the lens. No one wrote the word Amos had used. Gabriel transferred to vegetation monitoring the next spring. He still worked wetlands, but he chose assignments reached by boardwalk or levee. He stopped servicing stations from a boat. If a route sheet required him to step from aluminum into black water, he traded routes with someone else and never explained why. Years later, rain still brought the preserve back into his house. It tapped the gutters like water falling into that empty crawfish bucket. It drew the mineral smell from old tools in his garage. Whenever the air begins to smell like wet iron, Gabriel does not open the truck door. He turns off the vents, places both feet where he can see them, and waits behind the locked glass until the smell is gone. Story 7. The red light on Rachel Sloane's avalanche beacon blinked against her palm while Nolan Pierce checked the transmit signal. They stood in the equipment room at Marblemount, surrounded by drying skins, coiled rescue rope, and packs that smelled of wet nylon. Snow tapped the high window above the boot rack. The forecast had called for it to begin after noon. It was not yet 7. Nolan moved 3 steps away and switched his beacon to search. "Good signal," he said. "Now walk until the numbers drop." Rachel crossed the room, watching the distance reading shrink. She had done the same check before every winter patrol for 9 years. Beacon, shovel, probe, spare gloves, stove, emergency shelter, radio battery against an inside pocket where the cold could not drain it. She switched the beacon back to transmit. Its red lamp resumed its slow, harmless blink. On the work table, a printed avalanche bulletin warned of new snow over a weak layer of surface hoar. Natural slides had already run from several steep paths east of New Hallam. The upper Boston Basin route had been cleared the previous afternoon. 2 climbers had come out irritated, and one had demanded the name of the ranger who had canceled his permit. Rachel had given him her card. Her patrol that morning was supposed to be simple. She would ski the closed section of Cascade River Road, inspect the closure markers, and check for vehicles or fresh tracks beyond the gate. She packed half a peanut butter sandwich in her jacket and left the other half beside the radio console for Nolan. He pointed at it. "Your emergency ration, your performance bonus." Before she could shoulder her pack, the telemetry computer sounded from the next room. 3 rising tones. Rachel and Nolan both stopped. The screen displayed a new transmission from Basin Station 1. Air temperature, wind speed, battery voltage. The numbers were ordinary. The station was not. It belonged to an alpine snow study that had ended the previous fall. 5 portable weather stations remained along an elevation transect above the basin. Their batteries had been disconnected for winter, their solar panels covered, and their data loggers placed in sleep mode until removal in spring. Rachel knew because she had helped shut them down. Nolan opened the equipment record. Could be a queued packet. 4 months late? Government network. That explanation fit well enough for both of them. Rachel was already going toward the drainage, so her supervisor asked her to inspect only the lowest station if visibility remained safe. She signed out a second radio and added insulated pliers, electrical tape, and the station key to her pack. Nolan watched snow cover the parking lot outside. "A status light tells you the machine is talking," he said. "It does not tell you where to go." Rachel told him she would remember. By mid-morning, she had skied beyond the last tire tracks. The unplowed road rose beneath a smooth layer of powder. Alders leaned into the corridor, releasing small loads of snow whenever the wind moved through them. Sound behaved differently in a storm. The climbing skins brushed beneath her skis, close and dry. Her breathing filled the hood of her shell. Everything beyond those noises seemed farther away than it was. She checked the closure signs, photographed a fallen tree across the road, and radioed her position. Nolan answered through light static. No one had entered the drainage since the evacuation. At the summer trailhead, Rachel left the road and followed the buried route into forest. Orange flagging marked a safe line around the first avalanche path. She stopped below it, dug a quick hand pit, and found the weak layer exactly where the bulletin said it would be. New snow slid from the old surface in a clean block. She stayed in the trees. The lowest weather station stood on a bench above the creek. Rachel heard it before she saw it. A thin electronic chirp repeated under the wind. She pushed through snow-laden hemlock branches. The station mast appeared 10 yards ahead. Its anemometer cups were packed with ice. The solar panel remained under its gray winter cover. A red status lamp blinked inside the logger box. Rachel brushed snow from the latch and opened it. The battery leads were connected. She had disconnected those leads herself in October. She remembered Nolan holding the flashlight while she wrapped the terminal ends in blue tape. The tape was still there, folded neatly around the cables. Someone had peeled it back, attached the leads, and pressed it flat again. Rachel called Marblemount. The radio answered with static, then Nolan's voice. "No patrols since shutdown," he said. "Discant it and come back." Rachel removed the inline fuse before separating the leads. The red lamp went dark. She slipped the fuse into her chest pocket and closed the box. 3 rising tones sounded through her radio. Basin Station 2 had begun transmitting. Rachel looked uphill. The trees shifted in blowing snow. Far above them, a red point appeared and vanished. It returned at an even interval. Station 2. She knew the transect. The second mast stood only a quarter-mile away, on a low ridge that avoided the open start zones. Reaching it would take less than 20 minutes. If someone had reconnected one station, they might have reconnected all of them. Rachel told Nolan she would check the second unit. He answered at once. Negative. You have your turnaround? She looked back at her ski track. Wind had already softened its edges. Copy, she said. Rachel began descending. After several minutes, her altimeter showed that she had gained elevation. She stopped. The slope beneath her skis looked level in the whiteout. Trees leaned in different directions under uneven snow loads, removing the vertical references she normally used without thinking. Her compass indicated that she had traveled southeast instead of west. Rachel turned until the needle aligned with her return bearing. She moved between the trees, checking the instrument every few steps. The red light remained ahead of her. She should have been moving away from it. The electronic chirp grew louder. Station 2 emerged beside a stunted silver fir. Rachel stared at the mast until wind-driven snow covered her goggles. Her jaw had begun to shake. She pressed her tongue against the back of her teeth and forced herself through a field check. Name, date, location, objective. She answered each one aloud. The station box was open. Its battery felt warm through her glove. The display showed a manual wake command, though the control pad was buried beneath wind-packed snow. Rachel pulled the fuse. The light went out. Her radio gave 3 rising tones. Station 3 came online. A red point blinked above her through the trees. Rachel called Nolan, but the radio produced only a clipped syllable and static. She switched to the second unit. The same noise answered. She set a downhill bearing and moved. The ground rose beneath her. For the next half hour, Rachel tried to descend without looking at the light. She traversed left until her right leg burned from holding the edge. She made kick turns among the trees. She checked her altimeter after each 100 paces. Every reading was higher. The red point stayed in front of her. At Station 3, the mast was bent from an old snow load. Its data logger should have been dead even with power. Rachel had tagged it for replacement after finding moisture behind the screen. Now the screen displayed wind speed. There was no wind at the sensor. Its frozen cups did not move. The reading climbed anyway. Rachel removed the fuse and put it beside the others in her pocket. For a moment she heard nothing except snow grains brushing her hood. Then came the tones. Station 4. The red light appeared higher, beyond the last thick trees. Nolan's warning returned to her in his exact dry voice. A status light did not tell her where to go. Rachel turned her back on it and forced herself downhill. The slope steepened under her skis. She stopped and measured it with the inclinometer fixed to her pole. 38 degrees. She had reached the lower edge of the evacuated start zone. Rachel crouched and scraped through the new snow. The weak layer collapsed beneath 2 taps from her wrist. A fracture shot across the small column and disappeared into the wall of the pit. She backed away on her knees. A low sound moved through the slope. Whump. Snow settled around her boots by less than an inch. She felt it through both shins. Above her, the red light blinked. Rachel moved across the slope toward a stand of subalpine fir where the ground formed a shallow rib. She kept her skis pointed across the fall line. Each step made a soft plate of snow crack around the tips. The light brightened as she approached. Station 4 stood at the edge of the trees. Its mast shook, although the air around Rachel was still. The logger door swung open and struck the metal housing. Tap, pause, tap. The battery compartment looked empty. Wind-packed snow filled the place where the battery should have been, but an inline fuse remained clipped beneath the upper lip. The red lamp continued blinking. Rachel pulled the fuse. The lamp went dark. 3 tones sounded from the radio in her pack. She did not take it out. Far above, through moving snow, another red light began to pulse near the crest. There was no Station 5 at that elevation. The last unit sat below the ridge, on the opposite side of the transect. Rachel could picture its position on the installation map. The light above her blinked again. The snowfield answered with a long, tearing crack. Rachel threw herself toward the firs. The slab released above the whiteout. She heard it gathering before she saw any movement. Snow struck the trees with a deep rush of water forced through a narrow channel. She pulled the handle on her airbag pack. The bag inflated around her shoulders as the first moving snow hit her legs. Rachel grabbed a fur trunk. Her skis twisted downhill, one binding released. The other held, dragging her hip away from the tree. She locked both arms around the trunk while snow packed against her chest and filled the space beneath her chin. Then the slope stopped moving. Rachel hung there, half buried. The airbag pressed her face against rough bark. Her left leg remained pinned, but she could move her toes. She cleared her mouth with one glove. Then she dug downward until she found the binding and released it by hand. The red light still blinked above the debris. Rachel turned away from it. She crawled along the protected side of the tree rib and dug an emergency trench beneath the lower branches. Her radio worked again inside the shelter. Nolan answered on the first call. Rachel gave him her coordinates, her condition, and the words he needed for the response plan. Avalanche involvement, no burial, sheltering in place. She did not mention the lights. The storm held her there for 14 hours. She kept the stove between her boots and checked the skin on her fingers every half hour. Whenever she began to drift, she counted the 4 fuses in her pocket. At daylight, a ground team reached her from below. Nolan led it. He said nothing when he saw the inflated airbag or the single ski lodged in the debris. He only touched her shoulder and pointed toward their route down. The follow-up inspection took place after the avalanche hazard eased. Technicians found the first 3 stations disconnected, with their fuses missing. Station 4 had been torn from its anchors and carried downslope. Its battery was still in place, so was its fuse. The empty compartment Rachel remembered was not mentioned in the report. Station 5 had never transmitted. Network staff concluded that stored packets had reached the server in sequence after an intermittent repeater failure. The red lights were attributed to reflected headlamp glare, blowing snow, and impaired judgment during early hypothermia. Rachel's location track showed her climbing in a nearly straight line from the first station to the 4th. It did not show the repeated downhill turns she remembered making. The 4th fuse in Rachel's evidence bag was listed as unassigned field hardware. The incident review praised her shelter decision and criticized her failure to obey the turnaround order. Both conclusions were accurate enough to sign. Rachel returned to winter patrol the following season. She no longer used a status lamp as a landmark, no matter how poor the visibility became. She took bearings on paper, wrote down every elevation, and stopped moving if the mountain and her instruments disagreed. She still keeps the fuses from that patrol in a small metal tin. Before entering winter backcountry, she places all 4 across the red station symbols on her map and counts them twice.